So, hello everyone. Good evening, all. This is Vinod here, a member of SUG Chennai. So, it's great pleasure to have Ishrat here, who is a Sitecore MVP and technology evangelist. She will take us through the webinar on taking her website to the next level using SXA. So, once again, on behalf of SUG Chennai, welcome Ishrat to the webinar, extending my welcome to all the participants. Over to Ishrat. We are very excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me again this year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ishraq. I've been working with Sitecore for the past 10 years. And yeah, I've been half of that time as a Sitecore MVP. And I'm happy to talk about everything Sitecore. This is my Twitter handler. Feel free to DM me anytime if you have any questions or you would like to know more about any specific topic. I'm more than happy to help. Again, I want to extend my gratefulness to you guys for having me again and to talk about Sitecore SXA. And for you guys, if you are wondering why we're talking about SXA, and maybe this is God knows how many sessions has been done on SXA so far. I think the main reason for me for wanting to talk about SXA and share more about the latest is that I've been working with SXA for the past couple of years, and I've seen different implementation for it, right? For you guys who have been around since the initial launch of it till now, probably have seen how it has evolved over time, right? From being something that we thought that this is gonna be, a replacement for us developers. It's gonna be just a drag and drop components. It's all about zero coding towards understanding how powerful it is as a framework, and it's never about just using out of the box or focusing on writing like zero code, but more about understanding our customers better and how such tools like SXA can help us speed development time, but it allows us to focus on other areas we typically neglect. So for the sake of this session, I'm going to go quickly about what's new in SXA and version 9.3, things that we need to keep in mind when we start thinking about building SXA sites. It's not only about components, it's about the whole journey that we are implementing these sites for. And then I'm going to shift the focus into a specific area, which is knowing your tools, how we can understand the SXA offering and how to tweak that to better, accommodate and help our customers get the best out of Sitecore. And this is going to be in more of a demo format. So just having a couple of slides, and then we're going to move into more of a practical part of the session. So what's new in 69.3? I think for you guys who have been interested with JSS for the past year, I think the major improvement in Sitecore 9.3 was the official support of SXA and JSS at the same time. If you have been following SXA before, you won't be able to build JSS with a proper integration with the SXA. This is coming in 9.3. Under the hood, as we say, we have more improved rendering times for these components. We have a faster templating engine. If you have worked with the SXA before, you're familiar with in velocity templates. This has been removed. and has been replaced with another template engine that's called uh, Scripon, and it allows you to um, build, like proper. I'm not gonna say proper because this is still new, but it's more of a seamless experience for front ends as well to help you build HTML in a way that can be even done in Visual Studio using IntelliSense. So we already have some sort of extensions in Visual Studio. Um, we're gonna see actually, and that was like a nice surprise to see a bunch of new search components. So if you take a look now into the search section in the toolbox, there's like pretty much more improved and enhanced components out of the box that helps you, um, provide more of a rich search experience rather than implementing this our own. And finally, using Scripin, it's like defining more of a new front-end workflow. For the sake of this session, we're gonna focus more into the developer aspect of it, and hopefully in the future, might have the time to cover the front end as well. But let's take it one step at a time and just try to understand what's new from a developer perspective. All right. If you have been working with the 6.8 so far, the word creative design, wireframes, theming, and these new jargons that used to be limited with the design team, we started to use it on a more of a daily basis, right? Because SXA allows you to use the experience editor to actually do wireframing, to build like this black and white representation of any page, and then break that into different components and use the toolbox actually to build pages from scratch even before we start exporting that and applying themes to it. So the first thing when we talk about SXA nowadays is that it's no longer a discrete process. For you guys who have been working with companies and agencies who have a well-defined process like that says, first of all, we're gonna go and collect requirements. Second phase, we're gonna start building wireframes and designs, and we're gonna get approval from the client. And then next stuff, it's gonna go for front ends. For them to create, HTML, provide us with the styles and such, and finally, it's over to developers to start the backend implementation. With SXA, this kind of a process is no longer like enough to better integrate SXA within your agency workflow. So it is really important to always revise internal processes when it comes to this thought process, because with SXA, sometimes you need to have that as part of like the process from A to Z. It's not only the last step in the process. Now, multiple processes can happen at the same time. So always keep that in mind. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is going back to basics. And what we mean by that, looking at SXA, it's very tempting, right? To play around with the toolbox, to focus on building components very fast, where you can just start by creating a page design, drag and drop your components into the page, create partial designs for the header, for the footer, to, like this happens very quick, that sometimes we start to focus on delivery rather than the process and the user journey, or even the client that we are delivering the site to. So always think about knowing your customers. And we mean by that, if we go back to this page, and as a developer, you have been received the design or user stories that tells you, I want to build like a page header, a footer. In the middle, I want a carousel, I want a CTA, I want an event with a calendar and such. The first question that we always need to go back and ask, what's the intention behind building this page, what the customer wants. Because if you go into the toolbox and only think about it from a component perspective, you're going to end up having your backlog as a huge list of components that you think all is needed at the end of the day. When we go to UAT or data migrations, just create pages and start to drag and drop these components, which is most of the time is not the case. Although like we have built-in SXA pages for content with, it's handling SEO, it's handling search, it's handling sitemap, and this is like really good and really powerful. But without always going back and ask, why am I building this page? You might end up have had, like built just a set of components, and then at the end of the project, now you are thinking about creating the actual pages. And now, as you are looking into this from a holistic perspective, you start to realize, oh, I shouldn't have built this component this way or that way. So always know your customers, know what their intention from creating this page or having the header this way or that way. The other thing is your marketers, because at the end of the day, yes, we want these websites to be delivered very fast to market. We want to have, like these crazy deadlines of I want a site within a month or maximum 3 months to be up and running, fully working with customer journeys, with personalization and such. And it's very tempting using SXA to follow that. But it's always going to come back to you and say, like, okay, now I want to register a goal on that component. I wanted to trigger once I submit a form, not only register a goal, I wanted to add context to XDB, or if I click on that CTA, I want like a certain thing happens. So this is from a marketing perspective is their day-to-day request, right? I want this. If I click on this CTA next time I go back to the homepage, I want the whole carousel to be replaced with one large banner associated with that CTA. So if we don't take into consideration marketing strategies that they are looking for to achieve at the end of the day, again, we risk having delivered components that not necessarily gonna support certain activities that market is gonna come back to us and ask for. Number 3, content authors. And again, you can see that all of these things need to be taken into consideration even before we start development. Because at the end of the day, as a developer, I know how SXA works. I know how the site core tree can be built. Maybe I have a good understanding of the information architecture and site core, but when it comes to content authors and beyond, like workflows and roles and this kind of stuff, how they are going to consume these components, how they can assign, let's say, a data source to a component, be able to add it to a page, to understand different variants might mean a whole different component, or maybe it's just changing the style of a component. I need to use rendering variant. So all of this kind of stuff that might be like something easy for the developer to do. For content authors, and especially those who are new to Sitecore in the first place, might find it hard. And you end up having your components built in a way that's not necessarily like content author friendly. So that's another consideration that we need to keep in mind before we even start to think, okay, this component is going to be sufficient enough for us to use, or no, listen, based on these requirements, based on our understanding of how content author is going to interact with this component, it's better to create a rendering variant in this scenario. And this is going to be way easier than duplicating this component and teach them how sometimes they need to do component A or sometimes how to do component B. So we've covered knowing your customers. Like this is just quick. This is something we need to always keep in mind. Knowing your marketers and their strategies, building for content authors, and the last thing is know your tools. So know your tools. First thing, SXA. Again, we've said that our understanding around SXA has evolved over the years, right? Um, it's not a rigid framework. It's not intended to, write zero code. It's about understanding what components are being offered, how we can utilize that to fit our business needs, or maybe it doesn't. So, what can we do about it? So, things to keep always in mind is that do not overkill your out of the box component. And I've seen this in scenarios where the understanding was okay, using SXA, then you are not allowed to write your own code, you're not allowed to write your own components. So they would be using, and I think one of the most implementation I've seen is like the exhaustion of the page listing component to be used in almost every single scenario, or the search results page to display different type of listing, or to create like more than 10 different variants, just because it's using the same component to fit different business need. And if we think about it from a Helix perspective, different components, although like if you look at the toolbox at the first glance, you think, okay, this is a component-based implementation, so I need to use the same component out across my different features and layers. That's not the case. If you need a specific articles listing or an article component, go ahead, create that module and add it to your offerings. Do not just go to the news or the event component or the search results and start to tweak that to accept a different kind of template and different fields just because we're going just to extend out of the box. So do not overkill your out of the box component and do not over engineer components. On the total other end of the equation, I've seen implementation where out of the box components were not used, thinking that any modification on that gonna break SXA in the future, and when we do upgrades, this is not the best practice. So almost every single component that the business was required was been customized and created separately. And again, do not over engineer your components. This might be the case if you have like a huge business site where they have a different number of, like it's a multi-sites environment where you have different brands, and each brand might at the end of the day use similar set of components, but then they go ahead and have their own specific brand components. Then you might end up building your own component library where you can build X number of components that can be themed or even overridden separately based on the brand you're working with, which is fine as long as, again, use what is offered out of the box and do not be afraid of even extending any of those just because we think this is not going to work and the next upgrade or no. So this is about knowing your tools, and this is what I want to focus on as we walk through about creating these different components. Like we get different components, different shapes, and different expectations. And again, how do we approach that? It's based on business to business case scenario. First thing, always think about is the out of the box component is enough for me. If it's enough, then use it. If you think it's actually, I can use that one, but I want to do a small change to it, go ahead, extend that out of the box. You can even create a different variant for these existing out of the box and then use your own variants out of it. Do it. Don't be afraid that by doing that, it's going to break upgrade. It's not the case. If your business case or the component you're building requires, okay, I have a similar component that's coming out of the box, but I have a complete different intention of using that. And I would need to implement more an extra template fields and extra design variants and stuff, then go ahead. You can clone any existing variant and add it as a module. And this is always keep in mind, if you are going this route, go about creating a module. This is going to help you when the business comes back after 6 months and say, listen, the client now wants to have this in a multi-site environment. So can we replicate the existing site and use these components that we've already built to that first site? So by creating this as a module, we're always giving the creation of a new site the option of adding specific module to microsites and provides you with proper and better managing of what we are building. And finally, if this component is not there, you can always go about customizing or writing your own business logic. This is also doable. This is can follow the same concept of adding a module, but instead of using an existing SXA pipeline that's handling page content or is handling page listing, you can go ahead and create your own to fit your business need. So always keep this in mind when you approach building a component. And let's start by going through how to implement these different scenarios into our site. So let me. So I've already prepared a demo site using Sitecore 93. If you already went ahead and started to work with Sitecore 93, the SII module allows you to select installing SXA as part of this wizard, which is really helpful because you want, like install Sitecore and then go about installing PowerShell and SXA. Now we have this optional step that says optional modules to install SXA as part of your installation. So I'm gonna just say anything for now, just to navigate to that option. This is my license. This is my SQL setting. My Solar service. Thank Solar. One, I can't even remember what was that. But anyway, we have the optional module of installing SXA. It takes a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about any subsequent steps to install SXA. All right. I want actually to start by doing the out-of-the-box component and see how that can fit our needs. And to showcase this, I want to actually go ahead and use the new search module, that our search components that had been added. We can always refer to the documentation. This is pretty much really helpful. You can share it with your designers as well as part of the process of them understanding that, yes, we have a list of components that we can always refer to and see. Yeah, we do actually have an event list. We have a map component. So can you integrate this, our SXA components within your wireframe so we get the approval early on, but taking into consideration that we have SXA in mind. If I jump to the search, you'll see like there's a huge list now of options included. We have the facet and that have been added. I think initially to support commerce, but definitely we can use it as part of faceting our search results without having to override anything on the search results page. We have the aggregated facet filter. For example, this one allows you
Sorry to
to.
interrupt, Ishraf.
Sorry?
Your voice is also so get echoed.
There's an issue with my connection.
Now it's fine actually.
Okay. So, for example, I was talking about the new aggregated facet filter component, and this one is used to give you the option of selecting what facet you want to display as part of your search um, page. And we have a different kind of search filter as well. If any of you guys are familiar with Courier, maybe have seen this, like a date range or a checklist or a radius or a slider. So now these like components come out of the box. So let's start. So I want to display just quickly a search results page that lists children. So I'm gonna go ahead, use the out of the box. I'm not gonna do any customization for now. I'm gonna create a blogs page. Underneath that, I'm gonna create 2 blogs. I call it blog 1. I'm gonna create blog 2. And I want to add some sort of tagging into it. So when I facet on the search results, I want to be able to have different tag filters that allows me to filter by tag. So I'm gonna go to the data folder, navigate to tags, I'm gonna create my own. This is my tag folder. I'm gonna call it blogs. I'm gonna add 2 tags quickly. One is called tech. One is called general. Gonna go ahead, tag my page. And again, this is one of the like comprehensive kind of pages coming out of the box, because we have sitemap settings, we have tagging, we have search scope, we have a different kind of template fields that coming out of the box that can, help us minimize the effort and time of creating base pages and inherit from that. Before I create my blogs page, I'm gonna go ahead quickly and rebuild my indexes. Rebuild. While this is happening, I'm gonna go to the blogs page, open it in the experience editor. So this is the search. Let's say I want to display a search results because I just want to show a list of blogs. I'm going to use the default data source item for this one. And if I take a look into that one, my search criteria, I can define a signature. So if I'm having a pagination component, I can say connect the search results to the pagination component using this. I can define a search scope, and this is basically a query that determines if I want, if left empty, to search the entire site, or if I want to only search by blogs, then I can create a query that limits my search scope to be within pages from the type of blog. I'm going to leave it empty for now. You can define page size, your sorting, your filtering, all of that. Okay. So let me quickly just see this in preview mode. So since I did not, specify a scope, it returns all the pages I have in the site. If I take a look at the scope for the search, scopes for the blogs, was specifying a certain template for it. And I think this one is the beige template. Yeah. If I want to exclude, for example, the home page, but definitely if we have proper paging, like a template from page blogs, then I can say I want only filter by the blog page. Okay, let me go back to editing. Let's add the filters. For example, I want to drag and drop an aggregated facet filter. By default, let's see what this component gives us out of the box. Let's go back to the SXA section. Let's go to presentation, rendering variants, aggregated facets. Under the default, it comes by save this by a variant component. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about the component field, but basically this one is directing SXA to go look for the search filter checklist from the renderings, and then sort by name, give it a query, and filter based on that checkbox. And if we want to know where this SXA tags are coming from, let's go to the setting part of the site. I'm going to go to facets. You'll see by default there's a predefined number of facets that are associated with the aggregated filter. So this one is going to search your index for the SXA tags. If you want, like for the title, to use the title, it's going to search the title. If you want to search by whatever a new field you want, all you need to do is to create this as a facet, make sure it exists in your index, and then it can be used as part of your faceting. So by default, I want to show the SXA tags. I want to drag and drop a facet summary as well. I'm gonna put it in here. Again, I'm gonna use the default. I'm gonna review that. Okay, I think something went wrong because it should show me a list of SXA tags. I like it when a demo 2 minutes ago it was working and then it's no longer working. So this one is talking to the SXA tags. And drag and drop a filter checklist just to see. Can I use the default? Same thing. So the SXA tags and the aggregation. So I should have been able to view this as part of, because these fields are already tagged and my index has already been built. Let's see. I'm not gonna spend much time on this. It's an hour certain time. But if I go to my master index, if I search for example, log 1, if I go to my SXA tags, I know for sure that it has been tagged with the general tag. So going back into this area should be able to have my aggregation filter selected with the correct one. Yes, the default. Anyway, so this is an example of how we can use out-of-the-box components into building like an accessible experience for the client. We can use an extra filters and add it to the page. Being able to create our own data sources or use existing ones if we have date range. It's all connected by making sure that we are using the correct facet and it's mapped correctly to the correct field. Till this one creates, just wanted to show you also, like if we go to the system, to buckets, if we go to facets, should be able to find also a different number of filters. For example, the updated date. This is one of the facets, or the creation date. This is one of the facets that's used by the date filter. You can always create your own. So this one is being mapped to the update date range and in solar, and you can create your own at any time and extend it to meet your requirements. So this is the first scenario of how we can understand what is coming out of the box and how we can configure it to meet our business needs. If we go back to the search filter component, I should be able to understand exactly how I can add this filter and being able to be displayed with these different tags. And then by clicking on each one of those, we should be able to filter the search results with this one. Again, my apology, this is breaking on me, but I think it's just a solar issue. So this is the first scenario. The second scenario was about something that we can achieve out of the box, which is the easiest example I can think of is the linked list. So the linked list is an example of a component that, it's under navigation, can be extensively used across your website. You can use it for the footer lists. You can use it for whatever type of data you want to show, right? Let's, for example, just take a quick look into what it's giving us. So it's giving us the link field, so we can start adding our items, give it description, let's say blogs. And this is pretty much straightforward, an example of using a linked list. How about if we want an icon linked list? In many scenarios, we might be using linked lists to display our social media links in the footer. And the design is directing us to use an icon within that. So does this mean I need to, so the question we have always, do I need to go and create my own component, call it a social media component, or I can go to an existing component and see if I extend that. So you have this choice, and my advice, always go with your business. Is this something like a component that you need to do more customization on it, you want to own it, you want to share it across different sites, but it's always going to be a social media component? Or we might have other pages that might end up using an icon list and not necessarily be a social media. It could be a list of services provided, but it's always displayed as, because it's content authored and it's links, but we want to always associate with it an icon. So in this case, take a look into an existing component and see how you can extend that one. So let's go and see how this linked list actually works. Let's go to our rendering variants. I'm going to go to the linked list. This is the default variant. And then we have our link field. So we have a variant field and it's using the link field to do that. What I want to do actually is to create another version of this one. gonna call it image link list, and I want to extend this link field by having an image into it. So an example would be if I go to my feature, I'm going to quickly just create something like demo. I'm gonna create a navigation module, and I want to create a template. So we just seen that the linked list is using the link template. So what I can do is inherit from that one. So I'm going to go into feature, go to experience accelerator. I'm going to look into the navigation module and look into the link field. So I'm going to inherit the link field. So in this case, I'm using the same setup, which is using the link field, but I'm going to only add an icon into it. So I'm going to call it icon image. So what this does, if I go to the link, I go to the inheritance, now I have access to the link as a general link within the link section. I'm going to call it the same section, so it shows in the same place. Then I'm going to use and add my image field into it. So by far, what I've done is create my own template, extending the link template. And the next step, I want to direct my variant to use when I display the link list, I want to use the image one as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is to add a field, and we call it icon, right? We can use the responsive image, but for the sake of this, I'm going to use an icon. And then at my definition in here, which field we are going to use to generate the link field is going to be the link field. So far, so good. So by now, all I was doing is create another variant of an existing component and give it the option to display something new. And that's, in our case, is the icon. I'm not going to go because I'm seeing that the clock is ticking. Go and see how that works. But basically, if I go into my rendering now, I should have an image link list. And since I'm using an icon field, I'm gonna save it. It's displayed like this because if I go to my data source, the data source I'm creating is a linked list, and the linked list till now is not accepting these links to have an image. It's a pure link. So what we can do actually is to go to this data. So we know that the insert option for the linked list is a link, and now we want to add an insert option to include an icon link as we just created. So the best way to do this is not to override the data folder and doing this on a specific folder, but we can always go back to the settings and add this as a rule. So I'm going to go to settings, I'm going to go to rules, I'm going to go to insert options, and I'm going to create a rule that says insert icon image. And it's a very basic insert icon link. I'm gonna name it the same thing. I'm gonna edit my rule. I'm gonna say if my template is a linked list, so when the item template is a specific template, which is going to be feature as we just seen, gonna use experience accelerator, gonna go to navigation, and choose the linked list. And I want to add a specific insert option, which is the one we just created. If I go to demo, to my navigation, my icon image, again, you should have, like a proper display of this. You have a proper icon for that template. So if I am here to go and create and right click on it, then I can create an icon image. I'm already having the link inherited from that template. Let's say I wanted this as blog one, and then I can use any of these icons. So since I'm using the same data list, I'm not going to change it, but we should be able to have our linked list now displaying an icon. This one is still empty because it's from the link field, but this one is a clickable icon list. And we can just reuse everything we just created as part of this. So this is an example of how we can easily extend an existing out-of-the-box component and use that. The third option that we talked about was how we can create our own component. And we have two types of components that we can create. I'm going to demonstrate how we can create one by cloning an existing one, and then just walk you through how we can build our own custom component by code. And then how we can use the new script template as a new field to display certain information to the user. One of the most cloned components actually is the promo component, and basically because it has a very straightforward data source mapping. So you have a data source with different fields and you can map it to anything. So based on your custom or your business scenario, you can say, I want to clone a page content. I want to clone a link list. And we've actually worked with scenarios where we created our own link lists because we have a specific business requirements that require to use a link list. And that business cannot be directly achieved by using the out-of-the-box. So the first thing you need to think about is, okay, this component I'm creating, from a Helix perspective, where should it reside? And if I am adding it into the toolbox, where should it go? So if this is a pure page, a pure content, then that goes to the page content. If this is maybe a new, let's say like an article listing or a blogs module, then it's going to create its own. So let's, for example, create a blogs module. And again, this is really important to keep in mind when we create multiple sites. So what I'm going to do is go to the system. So this is, if I go to the feature settings, this is where I'm going to find all the SXA components, all the setup that when, say right click, create a new site. So if I go here and say under my tenant, I want to create site demo number 2. It gives us a list of modules to install out of the box as part of this site setup. So what we're going to do is create something similar to this that allows you next time you create a new website, you add it to a new website, or you can add it to an existing one. So we're going to create our folder for this site specific. I'm going to call it demo. Then I want to go ahead and, add a module. So the whole idea of a module is to help you create quickly using, PowerShell, your templates, your branch templates, your renderings, and everything, and define where you want this to be stored, and if you want this on a tenant level or on the site level. So maybe you want this specific to this brand, but the next brand you want to create, you don't want that available, but you want it to be a specific. So you can select if this is part of this tenant and share between different sites or not. I want to create all these. By default, these folders, I'm going to put this into a demo folder. So instead of this feature, I'm going to add it to demo folder. And by default, it's going to create an empty folder for and an initial setup for my module. So this is a blog site setup. It allows you to define what happened once you go ahead to the site. For example, now if I go to my site and click on, sorry, go to scripts, add site module, I should be able to add this blogs module into my site. So this is the first step. Always think about creating a module. If you're creating this just as a clone of existing components, or even if you want to create your own code and customization, always go by about creating your own new module, and then you can decide if this is going to be out of the box or not. So the second thing, we're going to go into our renderings. I'm going to quickly select the page content, and I'm going to clone the promo component. If I click on scripts, on clone rendering, I should be able to call it whatever I want. So this could be a blog spot. I want this to be under the new demo site that we've just created. We can give it a class based on what we've agreed with the client, with the front end. We can inherit from an existing parameter template, or you can always create a new one if you know that you're gonna end up passing something new. We're gonna create our own data source as well, because we're gonna use a different setup. And finally, are we going to use the original, or we are going to copy that into a new so I'm going, because we already have a variants folder, I don't want this to break, I'm gonna create a blogspot HTML as a copy from the promo component. So important thing to know when this is happening is what is happening behind the scene as part of this module. So first thing, always look into your settings. You see that SXA has created the options that you need to add this as a rendering variant to create a data item for you under the data folder, and finally to make it available into the renderings. And this is also achieved by going to the branches. Take a look into your branches now and how that looks like. We've already created a demo folder. We have our blog. Then we have two types of branch templates. The first one that define which rendering goes to the available renderings once I install that module. So the next time you clone another component and add it under the module, you need to come here and update this. So it would take this, like I have now a blog listing, I need to make sure that this is part of the toolbox is gonna show, and then it's gonna create your variant and how it's gonna look like. One of the things that we keep forgetting is once we install this into the module, and if we're making changes under the presentation, we forget to sync it back to the branch. And this is important so we don't lose any new modification that we've added once we add the module to the next site, for example. So these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we create this, when we create modules. And it's important because we're gonna you add it to TDS or Unicorn, so we need to understand what goes where. And basically, what if we go and take a look into the demo site and see the view for this component is going to be using the same renderings that we are using for the promo. So let's say we want to create our own component and not cloning an existing one. We're going to go about doing the same because we want to create our own settings. But then our renderings that we have just copied in here. So we have now a blog spot that's using the variants controller coming out of the box of SXA. We can go ahead and create our own controller and drive our own implementation. So an example of this, I have this rating controller, for example. It allows you to create a component that shows rating that integrates with a third-party API because we don't have this out of the box. So basically, I'm going about following the same SXA controller structure and even all the dependencies needed. So I've created my controller inheriting the standard controller, and I'm creating my own repository. I'm doing some dependency injection to register the controller, to register my repository. So this is my own custom project. And my repository, what I'm intending to do is I'm inheriting from the variants repository and the iBash content repository. This is our own implementation, but the variants repository, this is the SXA repository. If we are, in, let's say, customizing and creating our own component that eventually gonna be a list, then we're gonna use a list repository instead of the variants. So this is, we just, if I go to definition, we're trying to utilize what's coming out of the box from SXA. It gives you an access to the attributes that assign to the rendering variant. It gives you the model that has been passed to this component. It gives you a method to fill properties. So once you say this component fill properties is gonna map everything that you need from the data source, from CSSs and everything, and even take a look into placeholders. So for the sake of this, for example, you can fill these base properties, do your checking, because if you, like if it's the context item is null or your data source is null, I want nothing to be returned. However, I want to add an extra field, for example, it's called ratings, to my component. So the first thing is to create a new rendering model. So the rendering model, same concept. If you even open the SXA DLLs for any of these components, you'll find that it's inheriting the variance rendering model. You can have this as an empty model, but if you have an extra properties to pass, you can create. So in this case, we have created a string property to pass ratings to the components. And in our repository, what is needed is to do whatever. You can read from a dictionary because we did not have from before a component that can help us create and pass translation and dictionary to our rendering variants. So there has been different implementation to do that. One of them would be like this, passing, creating your own code, adding an extra property to your model, and in your view, you should be able to display it as you wish. So this is for the ratings text. Another approach was to create an variant field to handle dictionaries. Only needed if I go to, and obviously we will have our cloned, I think I'm missing it from here, but we have our cloned views as well added to the project. And all we need to do just to register our dependency injection. And this is pretty much straightforward customization of a component in SXA. It's following the same thing we always done. It's doing dependency injection, but it's all about knowing which models, which controller, which classes we need to inherit to always keep the SXA support for the components that we are creating. The last thing I want to quickly cover actually is the script and templates. So if you guys have been familiar with NVelocity templates, we use those templates to create or to access .NET APIs, or let's say code that we have in our solution. One of the examples of doing that, actually we wanted to display inside the CTA a sitemap, and we wanted that sitemap to be specifically created in a certain way. So again, it's all about you understanding to what we have out of the box and see if we want to either leverage that or create our own. So the promo component is the most close to a CTA component. So the way we thought about it, okay, we do have a CTA component. And what I need now is to add or call another component that we have out of the box in SXA. We do have a breadcrumb component. So to achieve this, first thing that comes to mind is to create a variant. So let's quickly create a variant definition. I'm going to call it CTA with sitemap. And this CTA with sitemap, but I wanted to have the same fields as this one, so we can just, I think the easiest way was for me to duplicate this. So let me duplicate this one, CTA. And I want at the top to display a breadcrumb. So one of the variant fields option that we have is to load an entire component. So what we can do is to go ahead and load a sitemap component into this. All we need to do is to go to feature, and this one, slightly under navigation, and we have the breadcrumb. Sorry, it should be breadcrumb, not sitemap. And we can configure if we wish the start page where we want this to show. Maybe I want to ignore the homes. I want this to just be shown like from a blogs. I want the separator to look like this. If I have any filters, if I don't, then there is no need to add that. So I can configure this on a component level. So in this way, what I've done is, because I know that we already have a breadcrumb component, we have a bromo component, by combining these two, I can either create a variant from the existing bromo component, say I want this with a breadcrumb, and just load that extra component, or I can say, no, this is gonna be a new component, so the blocks component that we've created could be a CTA with a breadcrumb, and I go to this rendering and add this as an extra field. So, and so far I did not even have to write any single line of code. The scribing templates. So another way of doing this for the breadcrumbs, as I mentioned, was the NVelocity. And the NVelocity has been replaced by scribbles in terms of an easier way of integrating HTML and allow content authors to be able, front-end developers to be able to define how the HTML going to look like without having to worry about the developer going into the NVelocity template and making sure that we are copying the correct HTML and we're putting the correct APIs in place to call the data from the code behind. So I'm going to do this with the page content. If we go into the documentation, Sitecore have created a huge list of out-of-the-box context components, APIs, or even functions that you can use to access, like our day-to-day components. So, for example, by adding this syntax to a page, you can get the homepage item of your site without even creating any custom code in your code behind. item, it allows you to get your context item, or if you have a data source. So all these helpers that we have used to consume in Sitecore in the code, and if we were using NVelocity to do that, we had to create these as a pipelines and register it to our site. We can create it out of the box. We can use it out of the box. Again, it's the same concept. If this list is not enough, it doesn't contain everything that we need to have, we can always create our own. So as a quick example of displaying the information of a page, I want just to create a new variant. I'm gonna call it default. So this is a page content. So I'm gonna display all the information about the page I have. I'm gonna insert scriben field, and then the template I've just gotten this from the documentation. I want to show these information, and I can select how I want this to display. So if I go to, for example, blog one page, I'm gonna go to publish, experience editor, I'm gonna go to the page content, drag and drop a page content, and use the default. So the data source item, it cannot access this member. So this is an example of some of the errors that might shown. So I'm going to go back to my template because this one does not have any access to the data source. I'm gonna, not sure why this is displayed very small. So I'm gonna remove the data source helper from here. So basically by calling these different number of helpers, I've been able to access the home item, the site name, the current page title. If I have a content field, it's gonna display. So it's an easy way of accessing these items out of the box. And we can do this like also like in a for loop to display for the blogs, for example. If I am in the blogs page, let me go quickly to this one and add the page content to the top. I want to create a new variant. Again, this is just for the sake of showing this, but you can always create, like a rendering variant specific to display certain things. So I'm going to display children. I'm gonna add a scriban template. And my template is going to display the children. So it's just a symbol for loop. Again, I wish I can expand this for you guys to be able to see. Okay. So it's a for each on the item children, and then display that, and I'm gonna remove this as a list. So I'm gonna display the title and the URL of my child. If I go back to this page and say I want to display my children, so it's going to display a list of blogs. So these are some of the out-of-the-box helpers that have been provided by Sitecore as part of the Scriven templates to help us navigate and like use like this .NET based commands without the need to go ahead and actually write a page. For the example of showing the dictionary item, and that's one, again, it's pretty much straightforward helper that all you need to do is to use what's called SC translate, and you pass the key for your dictionary. The new site setup, we have our own dictionary. So all I need to do, I can quickly create. So this is called cancel. I'm going to display cancel. And if I save my page now, I should have my translation, my dictionary showing that. So there is like way too much different scenarios that we can utilize what's out there out of the box, but at the same time you can always think about, should I just go ahead and use something out of the box like these aggregates and faceted components, or should I go ahead and extend an existing one and that should be it, or maybe I go ahead and create a whole new component from scratch, register that through code, and I should be able to register it to our SXA. So SXA is not a rigid framework. You have all the flexibility to either use it out of the box or to override it, but always make sure that even with the introduction of Scriben, you will see now lots of blogs talking about it. That does not mean that we have to use it. Scriben is an additional field type or variant field that's added to our renderings. It's there, so it means you can use it. It helps you to achieve a certain purpose, but it's not a must. So we do have an existing other variants that can help us with stuff that Scriben actually is providing us. We can use token. we can use template. Again, the component um, variant field is a very powerful field type that allows you to load another component into another component. So always think about, should I use this? Or maybe at the end of the day, if our HTML is pretty much complex, it's easier since Sitecore has within the creative exchange live now some Galp tasks that do the sync between these templates and back into the desk, so front end can actually work on those HTMLs, then you can go for it. But always think about your customers, what do they need. Always think about the simplest and straightforward. Do not overcomplicate your implementation just because you know, from a back end perspective, we like always to override things, right? Pipeline all the things. No, trust the framework. Know that for the most part we can use it out of the box, and then think about your options when it comes of overriding it if it's not enough. There's different best practices you can find out there about, you know, do not create more than 10 rendering variants for each component, and so that always makes you think, should I create a module? Think about your business case. Is this going to end up to be a multi-site setup, and the things I'm creating for this are going to be reused in another site? So always keep asking yourself these questions before, um, you know, just commit to a single implementation, and then at the end of the day, we come back and say we should have done it this way or that way. And in some cases, you might even lose the client because you've built a very restrictive, very rigid implementation um, of a framework that's supposed to be pretty much flexible. I know my apologies, I've taken a little bit more of your time, but actually, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ishraq. Guys, any questions you're having?
So thank you, Shel, for such a wonderful seminar. It's been great to see the SIA also visually. I have never seen it actually. Psycho extra assistant. Thanks for a wonderful time. It's great
Thank
to
you.
have you in this wonderful webinar. Thanks to all the participants.
Thank you all, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions later on. I'm available on Twitter or LinkedIn and happy to help. And have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishraq. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye bye.